MikeWeinstein.com/heroes.
Let's get back to our top story, the fallout from the Fort Hood massacre. Joining us now, our senior legal analyst, Jeffrey Toobin, and Mikey Weinstein, the president of the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, a former JAG officer, a military lawyer. Mikey, how many legal hurdles does he have right now? This is not necessarily going to be a very easy for this defendant, Major Nidal Malik Hassan, to deal with these charges. It seems like there were so many eyewitnesses who saw it unfold.
There's no question, Wolf, having been a former JAG for a decade, this is a senseless, murderous massacre, and he's going to have to try to find some sort of, I'm not sure whether there'll be an insanity defense or diminished capacity, but clearly what this man did was a horrible, terrible crime. That does not excuse the fact that the military needs to ask itself some very hard questions as to what's happening, and this is what our foundation's been fighting for 5.5 years, which is unbridled, religious intolerance within the ranks.
Well, maybe we'll get to that, but I want to focus in on the legal hurdles, Jeffrey. Give us a little sense. He's now hired a lawyer. He's got a military lawyer and a civilian lawyer who's helping him. What kind of strategy do they do?
Well, there are a lot of choices that need to be made by the prosecution here, starting with which court is he prosecuted in. This crime obviously took place on a military base. It can be brought as a court-martial, or it can be brought as a criminal prosecution in federal district court. One thing we know is that it won't be in Texas state court. They don't have jurisdiction over this. But this is going to have to be a negotiation between the Department of Justice and the Department of Defense over which side wants to prosecute him. Both of them have the death penalty, but there are pluses and minuses to both scenarios.
Well, that's a good point, Mikey. What are the major differences between a military trial and a civilian trial?
Well, there's a number. First of all, you still have the the requirement to prove your presumed innocence, and you have to show beyond a reasonable doubt that there is guilt. There's a different number of people in the jury there, and remember, in the military, there's a completely different criminal code. It's called the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and in the military. For instance, disobeying an order. Many constitutional rights are severely abridged, Wolf, in order to provide the necessary lethality, that is generated by the good order and discipline that the UCMJ brings to bear here. So there's a different criminal code in a military court-martial, same standard, but different than in federal district court.
I assume, though, Jeffrey, if he pleads insanity, that's the strongest case his lawyers will have, presumably.
Well, certainly some sort of mental defense seems to be about the only one available. Any sort of defense based on the idea that they somehow got the wrong guy seems unlikely to succeed. Insanity is often discussed, often invoked, and rarely successful. The courts have had a hard time for decades defining what insanity is, but in recent years, certainly since the Hinckley case, the would-be assassin of President Reagan, who was acquitted because of insanity, the defense has gotten narrower and narrower, and so, yes, that's probably his best hope, but it's not a very good hope, I don't think.
If you were representing him, you were a JAG officer, Mikey, for 10 years, if you were asked to represent him as defense attorney before a military trial, what argument would you make? What would you, knowing the facts as you know them?
The first thing I'd have to do is focus on, whether there's a diminished capacity, whether, there's an insanity available. I would try to get as many tests as I could get done to take a look at what caused the situation here. It's a very grim case for the defendant. Obviously, this appears to be very open and shut, but I can tell you, nothing is ever open and shut when you go to court. It's also very, very common to have both military and civilian counsel, and many civilian counsel are not used to the differences that occur in a court-martial. There are differences. The standard of proof is the same, but as I said before, you have a completely different criminal code because we're dealing with, I think the famous Latin phrase is quis custodiet ipsos custodos, who will guard the guards, and that's our military. We have a special code for them, and not every civilian litigator is familiar with all of the vagaries there, Wolf.
He's going to face the death penalty, I assume, either in a civilian court or a military court. Jeff, in a civilian court, I know it's not unusual for someone to plead guilty and hope that as part of a plea agreement and avoiding a full-scale trial, you get sentenced to life in prison, let's say, without the possibility of parole. Would something along those lines happen in a military court?
It could happen. There's plea bargaining in the military system as there is in the civilian system. The similarity is the prosecution has to agree to a plea bargain, and it's hard to imagine that given the magnitude and horror of this crime, there is going to be much option for plea bargaining. One thing to consider in thinking about which court he goes in, the last time someone was executed based on a court-martial was 1961, as I understand it. So it's a long time ago. The system is not really in place for an execution. Now, there haven't been many executions in federal court recently. Certainly Timothy McVeigh is the best-known recent example. But I think the fact that it is so rare to have someone executed in a court-martial trial suggests that that may be a road that the government decides not to do. But there's no hurry in this decision. Certainly the defendant is not going anywhere, and the Department of Justice and the Defense Department can take their time in deciding which approach is the right.
And we're going to be speaking with his defense attorney that he hired tomorrow here in the Situation Room. Guys, thanks very much, Jeff
I can tell you,
Mikey Weinstein, unfortunately, we're out of time. We'll leave it for the next time to complete that thought. But thanks to both of you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Families in grief and thousands of others feeling their pain. You're going to see how many military families cope with the loss of a loved one killed.